This is how data science is usually done. You open a Colab notebook, for instance, you add a code cell, then you say that you want to generate the content with AI, and you say something like, read up in a pandas data frame the results of international football matches. You generate the cell. Okay, you run it, fine, great. And at this point, I want to generate another cell, and I want to say, for instance, create a data frame with the number of matches played by each country. So AI will think a little bit more, and I can run the cell as well. So this is great, except for one thing. We started with very clear English prompts, but we are left only with programming language. And this is fine if we are programmers ourselves, because we can read df is equal to pd.read CSV and yada yada. But it doesn't make any sense if you want to share this notebook with people who are not programmers. It would have been much better to retain the English as the primary content rather than the code. The code could be there, but just as an accessory, essentially. It's a pity to have these beautiful English prompts, convert them into code, but then also lose them. We would like to have them in order to communicate with others. Can we have notebooks that are in plain language? The answer is yes, and we have built a Plainbook in order to do that. You can install Plainbook simply by doing pip install Plainbook. And once it's installed, you can create a Plainbook by doing Plainbook and then, for example, football.plnb. This opens in the browser. And now, from here you cannot directly read a CSV file on your system because it doesn't know which files to read, but you have to essentially tell it first which file you want to look at. Okay, so we want to look at football.csv. Okay, once that is done, we can insert an action or a comment, but in this case an action is more interesting. These are like the cells of normal notebooks, and we can say read the football dataset, okay? And because it knows from the files, it will know how to run this particular cell. And then we can create another action. For example, we can say create a data frame with the number of matches each country played, and we can again generate the code and run it. Okay, and this gives us some result. And if we are a bit suspicious whether this is good or not, we can also change the AI we're using and asking, for example, to validate the code. Does the other AI think that the first AI is correct? This is useful. For example, if you give me your Plainbook, I can check that the code conforms with the English. I don't have to trust you blindly, right? I can verify that the code behind the scenes, you can always look at the code if you wish, but that the code corresponds essentially to its English description. Okay, so this seems to be correct. We can do more complicated things. For instance, I can ask for a dataset that contains the wins and losses and ties both at home and away. Let's see whether this is generated correctly. Okay, this seems correct, but there is another way to test it in addition to using this button to validate the code, and that is, you see that every cell has a name. We can compare values across cells. For example, I can ask that the total of each row for each country here is equal to the total in this dataset after this cell. So let me do that. So I go here and I create a test cell. In test cells, you can refer to the execution status after multiple cells. And so I can ask that the total in this table is equal to the number of matches after cell count country, which is the previous one. We can generate the code and test it. This seems to work as well. We can add a cell that asks, for instance, what are the 20 countries that with the highest ratio of wins as guessed compared to home. We can run this cell, and here is the result. And again, if we don't trust it, we can check it compared to another AI. And the other AI concurs that it's correct. So this is the idea. We want to be able to do data science in English rather than using code, so that we can communicate with anybody who understands English. And we want to have the tools to check that the English corresponds to the code generated, both using multiple AIs and ending tests. In other words, Why were notebooks so successful? Because they could contain both the code and the results, and somebody who could understand programming was able to check that the results corresponded to the code, and so that the thing that was computed was correct, and those were truly the right results. And here we want to replicate the same idea, but using language. We want to be able to specify the language, and we want to be able to have anybody who is a recipient of one of these notebooks to be able to look at the language, check that the code matches it with LLMs as verification tools, and then run the code. Thank you.